The Dark Secrets of Abandoned Hospitals. Chapter 1. Introduction. I restore old buildings for a living, or I did back when I still believed the only things worth fearing in a derelict structure were rotten floorboards and asbestos. My name is Nolan Fisk, and for 9 years, I ran a small architectural preservation firm out of a converted garage. The kind of business that survives on passion more than profit. Old churches, abandoned mills, the occasional Victorian someone wanted brought back from the edge of collapse. I loved the work in a way that's hard to explain to people who've never stood inside a building that time forgot and felt the specific hush of it, like the walls were holding their breath waiting to see what you'd do. When the Historical Society in Ashcombe County offered me the Graymoor Sanatorium contract, I said yes, before I'd even finished reading the email. Graymoor had sat empty since 1979. A sprawling brick complex up on a wooded hill outside town, built in 1911 as a tuberculosis sanatorium and converted decades later into a general psychiatric hospital before finally closing its doors for good. 40-some years of nothing but weather and vandals, and the occasional urban explorer sneaking past the fence to take photographs for the internet. The county wanted it converted into a boutique hotel, one of those trendy adaptive reuse projects, and they needed someone to survey the structure before construction could even begin. I brought my usual crew, my longtime foreman, Deacon, solid and unshakable after 20 years in the trade, and a younger structural engineer named Yumi, who'd worked with me for 2 years and had a gift for reading buildings like other people read faces. Good crew, steady people, not the type prone to nerves. The first afternoon we walked the grounds, I remember standing at the base of that hill, looking up at Graymoor's dark windows, feeling something I couldn't quite name settle over me. Not fear exactly, more like the sensation of being looked at by something that had been waiting a long time for someone to finally look back. Big place, Deacon said, hands on his hips, squinting up at the brick facade streaked black with decades of rain. Feels bigger than the blueprints made it look. They always do, I said, though privately, I agreed with him more than I let on. The Historical Society had given us access to the original architectural records, along with a thin folder of newspaper clippings someone had compiled, mentions of the sanatorium's early years, patient census numbers, a handful of grainy photographs showing rows of beds on open-air porches where tuberculosis patients had once been wheeled out to breathe what the doctors of the era called the cure. Fresh air and sunlight, the treatment of choice before antibiotics existed. It sounded almost gentle, reading about it that first night in my motel room. Almost peaceful. I didn't yet know how many of those patients that supposed cure had failed. I didn't know about the numbers. The death toll so severe, in certain years, that the hospital had built a second, smaller structure, specifically to process the bodies before families could be notified, a detail conspicuously absent from every official document I'd find over the following weeks. As though someone, decades ago, had worked hard to make sure it stayed buried. That first night, walking the perimeter fence with a flashlight to get a feel for the property before we started work in earnest, I heard something that made me stop cold in the tall grass. A sound drifting down from one of the highest windows, faint but unmistakable, carrying on the still night air. Someone, somewhere inside that supposedly empty building, was coughing. Chapter 2. Strange events. I told myself it was an animal. Birds nest in old buildings. Raccoons too. and plenty of sounds echo strangely through empty brick corridors in ways that fool the ear into hearing something human. I mentioned it to Deacon the next morning, over coffee in the motel parking lot, half expecting him to laugh it off. He didn't laugh. He just went quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee slowly. Heard something myself last night, actually. Different building, though. Heard it from the old boiler house out back while I was doing the exterior walkthrough. Sounded like someone crying, real faint. Figured it was the wind through a busted window. Neither of us said what we were both thinking, which was that the wind doesn't usually sound quite that specific. The work itself started ordinary enough. We spent the first week documenting structural conditions, photographing water damage, testing floor joists for rot, the unglamorous groundwork every restoration project requires before anyone can start dreaming about what the finished building might become. Graymore's interior was exactly what you'd expect from 4 decades of abandonment. Peeling institutional green paint. Ceiling tiles collapsed in soft drifts across the floors, wheelchairs and gurneys left behind in hallways like the staff had simply walked out mid-shift and never returned. But small things kept accumulating that didn't fit the pattern of ordinary decay. Yumi found an entire ward on the 3rd floor where every door stood open except one, and that single locked door had no handle at all on the outside. Just smooth wood where hardware should have been, like someone had specifically wanted whatever was inside that room to stay inside it. When she checked the original blueprints against our survey, that room didn't appear on any floor plan we had access to. Not on the 1911 originals, not on the 1958 renovation drawings when the building converted to psychiatric use, a room that existed in physical space, but not on paper. Maybe it got added later, she said, though her voice carried a note of doubt even as she said it. Unofficial modification happens sometimes in older institutional buildings. I found something worse 2 days after that. A stack of patient logs in the basement archive room, water damaged but partially legible, dating from the sanatorium's earliest years. Names, admission dates, treatment notes in a doctor's cramped handwriting. Ordinary medical record keeping, until I got to a section from 1924 where the entries changed character entirely. The handwriting grew erratic, pressed hard enough into some pages to tear the paper. Patient notes stopped describing symptoms and started describing something else. A presence, the doctor called it, that certain patients in the isolation ward reported seeing at night, standing at the foot of their beds, watching them cough themselves toward death, with what one entry described as patient interest, as though cataloging the process. The doctor's final entry in that section, dated November of 1924, read simply, "I begin to wonder if we are curing anyone at all, or merely feeding something that has learned to wait very patiently for its meals." I closed that logbook and didn't open it again for 3 days. That same week, our equipment started failing in ways that made no technical sense. Camera batteries drained to nothing within minutes of entering the 3rd floor, despite testing fully charged moments before. Yumi's structural sensors, expensive equipment she trusted completely, began recording temperature readings that dropped 40 degrees in specific rooms, with no corresponding drop anywhere else in the building. No draft, no broken window to explain it, and every single night, without fail, That faint coughing continued, drifting down from windows in a building we'd triple-checked was completely, structurally, undeniably empty. Chapter 3. Darkness Grows. Deacon found the second building on a Thursday, the one the county's records had somehow failed to mention, tucked behind an overgrown stand of pines, maybe 200 yards from the main structure, small and squat and windowless, with a single rusted steel door that took the three of us, working together, to finally force open. The smell hit before anything else, old and chemical, and faintly, horribly sweet, the kind of smell that your body recognizes as wrong before your mind fully catches up to why. "This isn't on any of the site maps," Yumi said, her flashlight beam sweeping across a room lined with metal tables, drains set into the floor at regular intervals, cabinets still stocked with rusted instruments I recognized with a lurch of my stomach as embalming equipment. "Nolan, this is a morgue, a whole separate building just for processing bodies, and it's not on a single document the county gave us." I thought about the doctor's journal entry, feeding something that has learned to wait very patiently for its meals. We found the ledger in a filing cabinet in the corner, its pages brittle and foxed with age, and the numbers in it made my chest go tight with a horror that had nothing to do with the supernatural yet, and everything to do with plain human cruelty. Death counts far exceeding what the official sanatorium records claimed for those same years, sometimes double, sometimes more. Patients logged in this second ledger who appeared nowhere in the hospital's official admission records at all, as though an entire shadow population had lived and died at Graymore without ever officially existing. "They were hiding deaths," I said slowly, "understanding arriving in pieces, undercounting, probably for funding, for reputation, God knows what else. This building was where they processed the ones they didn't want anyone asking questions about." Deacon, standing near the door, went very still. "Nolan, look at the drains." I followed his flashlight beam down to the floor, where dark stains had settled permanently into the old concrete around each drain, decades old, impossible to fully clean even after all this time. But it wasn't the stains that had gone white beneath his weathered tan. It was the fact that fresh water was pooling around one drain in particular, clear and cold, seeping up from somewhere beneath the floor, though the building had no working plumbing, no active water source of any kind. We backed out of that building without discussing it, all three of us moving with the same unspoken urgency, and none of us looked back at that rusted door as we walked away. That night, back at the motel, Yumi knocked on my door around midnight, her face pale in the hallway light. She'd been reviewing our site footage, she said, cataloging the day's documentation before archiving it, and she needed me to see something before she convinced herself she'd imagined it. On the footage from the third-floor ward, the one with the handleless door, the timestamp jumped without explanation, skipping forward 11 minutes with no visible cut, no glitch in the recording itself. And in the single frame right before the jump, faint but unmistakable in the grainy low light, a figure stood in the hallway behind Yumi's own reflected silhouette, gaunt, hunched, wearing what looked like an old hospital gown, watching her work with an attentiveness that made my skin crawl, even through a phone screen. "I never saw anyone," Yumi whispered. "I was alone on that floor the entire time. I would have heard something, felt something. She stopped, swallowed hard. "Nolan, I think something's still in there. I think something's been in there this whole time." Chapter 4. Terror. Deacon wanted to pull the crew out entirely. I understood the impulse. God knows I felt it myself. standing in that motel parking lot at 1 in the morning with Yumi's shaking footage still glowing on her phone screen. But the contract, the deposit already spent on equipment, the stubborn professional pride that had carried me through 9 years of difficult renovations, all of it conspired to keep me arguing for one more week of documentation before we made any final decisions. I regret that now more than almost anything else in my life. The encounters accelerated fast once we returned to the site, like something had been testing boundaries during those first uncertain weeks and had finally decided the testing phase was over. Deacon, working alone in the East Wing measuring for load-bearing calculations, heard his own name called from an empty stairwell in a voice he swore afterward sounded exactly like his late father's, dead 11 years, a detail that shook him so badly he had to sit down on the dusty floor and put his head between his knees before he could stand again. Yumi refused to work alone after the footage incident, and I didn't blame her, though even working in pairs didn't stop the temperature drops, the batteries draining, the sourceless sound of coughing that had started over those final days, drifting down from windows on floors we knew for absolute certain were empty, because we were standing in every single room on those floors ourselves. The worst encounter happened to me directly on what would turn out to be our final full day at Graymore. I'd gone up to the 3rd floor alone. Foolish. I knew it even as I climbed the stairs, but I needed final measurements from that handleless room for the structural report, and some stubborn part of me refused to let fear dictate the terms of a job I'd committed to finishing. The hallway felt colder than the rest of the building, the particular cold that has weight to it, that presses against exposed skin like something with intention behind it. I reached the locked door and knelt to examine the frame, running my flashlight along the seam where door met wall, and that was when I heard breathing on the other side, slow, labored, the specific wet, rattling breath of someone whose lungs had given up most of their fight. A sound I recognized with sick clarity from every account I'd read in that 1924 patient logbook. "Hello?" My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. The breathing stopped. Then, from directly on the other side of that handleless door, close enough that I felt the words more than heard them, a voice rasped out 4 words that have stayed with me every single night since. "You shouldn't have come back." I don't fully remember the run down 3 flights of stairs. I remember bursting out into daylight so fast I nearly fell down the exterior steps, lungs burning. Deacon and Yumi both turning toward me with matching expressions of alarm as I crossed the overgrown lawn at a dead sprint. "There's someone in that room," I managed, doubled over, hands braced on my knees. "There's someone alive in that locked room and I don't know how. There's no way in, no handle, nothing." But I heard, Nolan. Yumi's voice had gone strange, careful. "There's no one else here. We checked in with the county this morning. Nobody's had access to this site but us in over 40 years. I straightened up slowly, looking back at that dark 3rd floor window, and understood with a cold, sinking certainty that whatever had spoken to me through that door hadn't been alive in any sense the word usually meant. Chapter 5. The Truth. I drove into town that evening and spent 4 hours in the county archive, digging through records the Historical Society clearly hadn't wanted, included in our original site packet, and what I found there finally connected every thread we'd been pulling at for 3 increasingly terrifying weeks. The room without a handle had a history buried deep enough that even the official psychiatric hospital records from the 1960s only referenced it obliquely. in language careful enough to suggest deliberate discretion. During the sanatorium years, before the building's conversion to psychiatric use, that room had served as an isolation chamber for tuberculosis patients considered too far gone to justify further treatment. Not quite abandoned, but close to it, given minimal care, while the hospital's limited resources went toward patients with better odds of survival. One name appeared in the margin of a 1924 budget document I nearly missed entirely. A small handwritten note beside a line item for reduced patient rations in the isolation ward. Bertram Cole, admitted, age 34, isolation since March. Family unaware of true condition, per Dr. Hollis's instruction. I found Bertram Cole's full story in a bundle of personal correspondence donated to the Historical Society decades later by a distant relative who'd apparently never realized what she was handing over. Letters from Bertram to his wife, growing increasingly desperate and disjointed as his illness progressed, describing a hospital that had essentially stopped treating him the moment his case was deemed hopeless, warehousing him instead in that windowless room, while officially reporting to his family that he remained under active care and improving steadily. His final letter, dated 2 days before his recorded death, begged his wife to come get him, insisted he was being left to die alone in the dark, while doctors who'd given up on him simply waited for the inevitable. The letter was never sent. It had been confiscated, along with dozens of others, filed away in a drawer instead of a mailbox. One small cruelty among what the Shadow Morgue ledger suggested had been many others across that institution's long, quietly brutal history. Dr. Hollis, I learned from a final cross-referenced record, had been the same physician who'd written that unsettling 1924 journal entry about something learning to wait patiently for its meals. Whether he'd meant it literally or as some kind of dark metaphor for institutional neglect, I couldn't say for certain. But standing in that archive room with Bertram Cole's desperate, unanswered letters spread across the table in front of me, I understood, with an ache that had nothing to do with fear, exactly what kind of grief and abandonment could curdle into something that lingers. Bertram hadn't been given a handle on his door because nobody had ever intended for him to leave that room again. He died alone, forgotten, waiting for a rescue that had been deliberately, cruelly withheld from ever reaching him. "You shouldn't have come back," the voice had said to me. Not a threat, I realized now, sick with a horror that had shifted entirely in character. A warning. Bertram Cole had been waiting 80-some years for someone, anyone, to finally come back for him the way his wife never had. And something about that endless waiting had twisted patience into something far more dangerous than simple grief. Chapter 6. Final Nightmare. The first went back to Greymoor alone that final night, against every piece of advice Deacon and Yumi both gave me, carrying nothing but a flashlight and Bertram's final unsent letter, which I'd taken from the archive without officially checking it out. The building felt different, walking through it in full dark, aware now of exactly what I was walking toward. The temperature dropped the moment I reached the 3rd floor, that same weighted cold pressing against my skin, and I made my way down that long hallway toward the handleless door, with my heart slamming so hard against my ribs I could feel it in my throat. "Bertram," I said, kneeling at the door the way I had days before, but with something different in my voice this time. Not fear exactly, though the fear was still there, but something closer to grief on his behalf. I found your letters. I know what happened to you. I know they left you here to die and never told your wife the truth. The breathing started on the other side, slow and labored, and beneath it, faint, something that might have been a sound of recognition or surprise, or a grief so old it had calcified into something else entirely. She never came, the voice rasped, closer to the door now, closer to human than it had sounded before, threaded through with an exhaustion that ached in my own chest to hear. I waited. I kept waiting. Nobody came. I know, I said, and my voice cracked on the words, tears I hadn't expected running hot down my face in the dark. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry nobody came for you. For a long moment, nothing happened at all. Then, impossibly, slowly, I heard the sound of old hinges creaking, a door that had no handle on the outside somehow swinging open from within, revealing a room that should have been empty and instead held a darkness so complete my flashlight beam seemed to simply vanish into it rather than illuminate anything at all. Come see, the voice said, no longer rasping, almost gentle now, achingly gentle, the voice of a man who'd spent 80 years learning exactly how loneliness sounds when it finally gets tired of waiting alone. Come see what waiting does to a person. Come keep me company. You understand now. You're the only one who ever came back to understand. I felt that same magnetic pull I'd read about in every account of every haunted place I'd ever researched, a gravity that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with grief, reaching out for the first sympathetic ear it had found in nearly a century. I stood at that threshold for a long moment, tears still running down my face, feeling the darkness inside. That room breathed slow and patient, waiting to see whether kindness would succeed where cruelty had once trapped him for good. I don't fully remember deciding to step back instead of forward. I only remember running again. The second time, in 3 weeks. That building had sent me fleeing into the dark, Bertram's voice calling after me down that long hallway. Not angry, not threatening, just achingly, endlessly sad. The sound of a door easing shut behind me, though I never heard it actually close. Graymore's renovation was canceled 2 weeks later, officially due to structural concerns beyond the scope of the original contract. I never told the county the real reason. I never told anyone the full truth, actually, until now, writing this down at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, the way I've been unable to properly sleep for months. Last week, going through old case files for an unrelated project, I found a letter addressed to me at my office, no return address, postmarked from a town 3 counties over that I've never once visited in my life. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and on it, in careful, old-fashioned handwriting that matched Bertram Cole's letters exactly, were 4 words. Thank you for listening. I haven't been able to throw it away. I keep it in my desk drawer, and some nights, working late, alone in my office with the lights low, I swear I can hear, very faintly, somewhere just behind me, the sound of someone breathing.